An American writer named Morgan Robertson once wrote a book called The Wreck of the Titan. The book is about an unsinkable ship called the Titan that set sail from England to New York with many rich and famous passengers on board. On its journey, the Titan hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sunk. Many lives were lost because there are not enough lifeboats. So, what is so strange about this? Well, The Wreck of the Titan was written 14 years before the Titanic sank. The sinking of the Titanic is one of the largest non-war related disasters in history, and it is important to be knowledgeable about the past. From the disaster to the movie, the sinking of the Titanic remains to be one of the most famous tragedies in history. I have been fascinated by the history of the Titanic for all I can remember. I have read and studied my collection of books about the Titanic and have done my research. First, I will discuss the Titanic itself. Second, I will discuss the sinking of the ship. Finally, I will discuss about the movie that was made about the Titanic. From the disaster to the movie, the sinking of the Titanic remains one of the most famous tragedies in history. The Titanic was thought to be the largest, safest, most luxurious ship ever built. At the time of her launch, she was the biggest existing ship and the largest movable object ever built. According to Jeff Tibbles in his 1997 book, The Titanic, The Extraordinary Story of the Unsinkable Ship, the Titanic was 882 feet long and weighed about 46,000 tons. This was 100 feet longer and 15,000 tons heavier than the world's current largest ships. Thresh stated in Titanic, The Truth Behind the Disaster, published in 1992, that the Titanic accommodated around 2,345 passengers and 860 crew members. The beautiful accommodations of the Titanic were decorated and furnished with only the finest items. According to a quotation from Shipbuilders magazine that is included in Peter Thrush's 1992 book Titanic, everything has been done in regard to the furniture and fittings to make the first-class accommodation more than equal to that provided in the finest hotels on shore. Fine parlor suites located on the ship consisted of a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, 2 wardrobe rooms, a private bath, and a lavatory. The first-class dining room was the largest on any liner. It could serve 500 passengers in just one sitting. Other first-class accommodations included a squash court, swimming pool, library, barber shop, Turkish baths, and a photographer's dark room. The Titanic was widely believed to be the safest ship ever built. Tibbles, as previously cited, described the Titanic as having an outer layer that shielded an inner layer, a double bottom that was created to keep water out of the ship if the outer layer was pierced. The bottom of the ship was divided into 16 watertight compartments equipped with automatic watertight doors. The doors could be closed immediately if water would enter into the compartments. Because of these safety features, the Titanic was deemed unsinkable. Now that I have discussed the Titanic itself, I will now discuss the tragedy that occurred on its maiden voyage. Here we have a primary source, which is a newspaper article called the Times-Dispatch that illustrates the disaster of the Titanic. The Titanic hit disaster head-on when it ran into an iceberg 4 days after its departure. The beginning of the maiden voyage was mostly uneventful. Tibbles stated that the ship departed from Queenston in Ireland at 1:30 p.m. on April 10, 1912, destined for New York. The weather was perfect for sailing. There was blue sky, light winds, and a calm ocean. According to Walter Lord in A Night to Remember from 1955, the Atlantic Ocean was like polished plate glass on the night of April. Their journey took a horrible turn when the ship struck an iceberg and began to sink. In the book Titanic, An Illustrated History from 1992, Lynch explains that the collision occurred at 11:40 p.m. on Sunday, April 14th. According to Robert Ballard's 1988 book, Exploring the Titanic, the largest part of the iceberg was underwater. Some of the ship's watertight compartments had been punctured and the first 5 compartments rapidly filled with water. Tibbles wrote that distress rockets were fired and distress signals were sent out, but there were no ships close enough to arrive in time. As the ship went down, some were rescued, but the majority of passengers had no place to go. Thresh stated that there were only 20 lifeboats on the ship. This was only enough for about half of the 2,200 people that were on board. The lifeboats were filled quickly with women and children on first. The ship eventually disappeared from sight. Tibbles explains that at 2:20 a.m. on Monday, the ship broke in half and slowly dipped under the water. At 4:10 a.m., the Carpathia answered Titanic's distress call and arrived to rescue those floating in the lifeboats. Lynch reported that in the end, 1,522 lives were lost. Here it is evident that the total of fatalities were tremendous. It distinguishes the percentage of fatalities between crew members and passengers. Now that we have learned about the history of the Titanic, I will discuss the movie that was made about it. A movie depicting the Titanic and a group of fictional characters was made. The movie was written, produced, and directed by James Cameron. According to Marsh and James Cameron's Titanic from 1997, Cameron set out to write a film that would bring the event of the Titanic to life. Cameron conducted 6 months of research to compile a highly detailed timeline so that the film would be realistic. Cameron spent more time on the Titanic than the ship's original passengers because he made 12 trips to the wreck site that lasted between 10 and 12 hours each. Making Titanic was extremely expensive and involved much hard work. According to a 1998 article from the Historical Journal of Films, Radio, and Television, Kramer stated that the film had a $250 million budget. A full-size replica of the ship was constructed in Baja California, Mexico, in a 17 million-gallon oceanfront tank. Cameron assembled an expedition to dive to the wreck on the ocean floor to film footage that was later used in the opening scenes of the movie. Marsh further explained that the smallest details were attended to, including imprinting the thousands of pieces china, crystal, and silver cutlery used in the dining room scenes with White Star's emblem and pattern. The movie was extremely successful. Kramer reported that the Titanic made approximately $600 million in the United States, making it the #1 movie of all time. It made approximately $1.8 billion worldwide and is also the #1 movie of all time worldwide. Titanic was nominated for a record 8 Golden Globe Awards only a few weeks after its release, and won 4. It was also nominated for a record 14 Academy Awards, and it won 11. Today, I first discussed the Titanic itself. Second, I discussed the sinking of the ship. Finally, I discussed the movie that was made about it. From the disaster to the movie, the sinking of the Titanic remains one of the most famous tragedies in history. In conclusion, remember the wreck of the Titan, the story written 14 years before the Titanic sank. It now seems as if it was an eerie prophecy, or a case of life imitating art. Whatever the case is, the loss of lives on the Titanic was tremendous, and it is something that should never be forgotten.